The place was the Cerro Tololo Inter-American Observatory in the Chilean Andes, or at least a remote satellite station attached to it. It was just concrete bunkers and massive, gleaming white radio dishes pointed straight into the black heart of the sky. Getting there was a nightmare. The final ascent was a gut punch. You go from sea level to 3 miles up in a day. The air is so lean, every single movement feels like you're doing burpees underwater. They tell you to walk slow, talk slow, think slow. My job was technical support, keeping the primary imaging array running. But my real problem wasn't failing sensors. It was the lead researcher, a brilliant but utterly unhinged astrophysicist named Dr. Elena Rostova. Elena was fire and ice. She wore these heavy, oversized knit sweaters, drank coffee that was blacker than the vacuum of space, and hadn't slept properly in 3 years. She was hunting a signal, an anomaly she called the Whistler. It wasn't a pulsar, wasn't a black hole merger, wasn't anything classified in the textbooks. It was a repetitive, low-frequency pulse, a rhythmic blip that showed up in the deepest, most sensitive scans every 48 hours, then vanished. The official explanation was always sensor crosstalk or thermal fluctuations. But Elena, she wouldn't have it. "It's a drummer, Alex," she told me one night, standing in the cold control room, staring at the green waveform on the screen. Her eyes were bloodshot, bright, and deeply serious. "The universe is beating a drum, and we're the only ones close enough to hear the thump. I'm up there for 6 weeks, living on granola bars, instant soup, and supplemental oxygen. Every day is the same. The blinding, brutal sun on the white dome, the dizzying view of the planet below, and the grinding routine of maintenance. Every 48 hours, I'd watch Elena tense up, wait for the Whistler, watch it register as this faint, perfectly symmetrical spike, and then watch it disappear. The isolation was getting to me. I started having these vivid, fragmented dreams. Daydreams, really. The thin air messes with your head. It makes you paranoid. About a week before the incident, I was calibrating the main dish, the huge satellite-style antenna, big enough to catch an entire planet. I was out on the access platform, a metal walkway circling the dish's base. It was sunset. Down below, the valley was filling up with this thick, silent cloud layer, like the ocean had evaporated and turned into white fluff. The mountain peaks were islands in a sea of fog. Suddenly, the air went dead. The wind stopped, the hum of the electronics dropped. And then I felt it, a strange electric pressure building in the atmosphere. It felt like I was standing inside a gigantic, uncharged battery. I looked up at the dish, this beautiful parabolic curve of polished metal. The whole rim of the dish, the antenna arms, the struts, the railing I was holding, started to vibrate. Not shaking, but vibrating with a tight, high-frequency hum that tickled my teeth. I bolted back inside. Elena was already there, staring at the weather console, her face pale, but with that familiar, frantic excitement. "It's coming," she muttered. "The atmospheric interference. It always precedes the Whistler. But this time it's too strong." "What is it, Elena?" "Just static," I asked, my voice thin and high from the altitude. She shook her head, running a hand over the cold monitor screen. "No, Alex, this isn't static. It's too coordinated. This is the energy signature of the storm itself, and it's interacting with something out there. Something that's drawing the charge." She looked at me, really looked at me, and her expression was both terrified and utterly resolute. "If we lose power tonight, Alex, we have to keep the recording running. I need to capture the Whistler inside the interference. It will tell us everything." We were 3 people on a mountaintop, cut off from everything, staring into a sky that was rapidly turning from deep cobalt blue to a sickly, unnatural green. The silence outside was absolute, and I knew, deep down, the power wasn't just going to go out. Something was about to break. We were strapped in for the ride, and the ride was about to start. The third man up there, Hernan, the facility manager, was a stoic Chilean man who usually moved like a sloth thanks to the altitude. But even he was panicking. "Elena, the stabilizers. They're showing an overload. The dish is tracking too fast." Hernan yelled, pointing at a bank of analog gauges whose needles were dancing violently in the red zone. Elena didn't look up. It's not tracking, Hernan. It's reacting. Something out there is pulling the signal. Alex, get to the auxiliary panel. I need that secondary power core isolated. I need pure energy to the recording system. I didn't argue. I didn't have the breath for it anyway. I struggled across the control room, every step a monumental effort in the thin air, the dizziness already setting in. I ripped open the auxiliary panel and started throwing switches, thick industrial breakers that threw blue sparks just from the friction. And then the storm hit.it wasn't a windstorm and it wasn't lightning. It was a whiteout, not snow but light. A blinding, searing flash of white light exploded outside the dome windows, so intense it burned the retinas right through my closed eyelids. The power died. Not a flicker, but a clean, terrifying thunk as the main grid collapsed. The control room went instantly black, save for the faint green glow of the emergency battery backup, just enough to illuminate the frantic, strained faces of Hernan and Elena. Hernan gasped, clutching his chest. The generators! The surge must have taken out the mountain relays. Elena, however, was smiling. A terrible, manic smile. Perfect, she whispered. The primary dish is down. But the recording system has its own battery. Alex, the time. What's the time? I fumbled for my watch, my hand shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to read the glowing digital display. It's 3 o'clock hours, Elena. 3 sharp. 3 hours, she whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and triumph. The anomaly is due in 33 minutes. We are running on borrowed time. For the next half hour, we were just 3 shadows in the dark, watching the storm rage outside. I could hear this terrifying, high-pitched whine coming from the dish outside the reinforced dome. It sounded like the metal was singing, or maybe protesting. The vibration was back, that feeling of standing inside a gigantic, uncharged battery, only now the charge was actively building. Hernan kept murmuring in Spanish, counting down the minutes, terrified of the altitude and the dark. Elena was crouched over the single active console, her fingers hovering over the data feed. At exactly 3:33. The screen blazed green. It wasn't just a spike. It wasn't the rhythmic whum we knew. The screen was filled with a complex, dizzying pattern, a perfect interlocking structure of sine waves and frequency shifts, all overlaying the raw, wild static of the atmospheric storm. It was the whistler, but amplified and clarified by the massive energy surge. It was like looking at the entire anatomy of a ghost. Elena leaned in, eyes inches from the screen, breathing shallow, ragged gasps. It's not a pulse. It's a sequence, she whispered, her voice almost unrecognizable. A perfectly repeating mathematical sequence, like a clock. But look at the periodicity, Alex. Look at the numbers. She pointed a trembling finger at the data readouts scrolling across the bottom of the screen. The sequence was looping flawlessly, and the time interval between the start and end of the sequence. It was exactly 48 hours and 17 minutes. I looked at her, confused. So what? It's a clock that needs 15 more minutes. Elena shook her head violently, tears finally welling up in her red-rimmed eyes. No, our planet rotates perfectly every 24 hours. A signal that repeats every 48 hours is local to our system. It's an Earth orbit. She jabbed her finger at the screen, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. But Alex, the periodicity. 48 hours and 17 minutes. Nothing in a standard, stable orbit around Earth has a cycle of 48 hours and 17 minutes. The math doesn't allow it. It would be wobbling, decaying, screaming through the atmosphere. It doesn't belong here. I felt the blood drain from my face. She was right. The anomaly wasn't just a faint signal. It was a ghost in the machine of the solar system, following a perfectly stable, impossible orbit that defied all known physics. We had captured it. We had the data. But the moment the sequence finished its loop, the battery indicator flashed red. It's done, Hernan groaned, relief washing over his voice. It's over. But Elena was staring past the screen, through the dark window of the dome, out into the thin, cold night. The electric charge in the air was gone. The whiteout was gone. Everything was just cold and dark. "No," she said, her voice hollow. "It's not over. We got the sequence. Now we wait for the sun, and we pray the sequence doesn't start again." We were stuck on the mountain, the only 3 people in the world who knew the impossible math of the ghost in Earth's orbit. And we had to get the data off the mountain without Mike or anyone else, finding out what we knew. We're isolated, we have the impossible data, and we're waiting for rescue. Part 3 will be the escape, the realization of what the Whistler truly is, and the happy-ish ending. The sun brought the temperature up, and Hernan, bless his practical, altitude-slowed heart, focused on the only thing that mattered to him: survival. He managed to get the auxiliary diesel generator sputtering back to life. It wasn't enough to power the main dish, but it was enough to restore communications and basic heating. "They're sending a truck up from the main base," Hernan reported, his voice shaky. "They think it was a localized lightning strike." Elena and I exchanged a look. We knew it wasn't lightning. Lightning doesn't leave a perfect, 17-minute mathematical anomaly. We had maybe 2 hours before the truck arrived, and we had to make a choice. The raw data, the physical disk containing the sequence, was sitting on the terminal. "If the organization gets this," Elena muttered, wiping a streak of dried coffee off the disk label, "they'll classify it. They'll build 1,000 more dishes, launch missions, and spend 50 years chasing a ghost they don't understand. And they will never let us publish the truth." "The truth being?" I asked, shivering, even though the heat was back on. "The truth," she said, clutching the disk, "is that the orbit of 48 hours and 17 minutes is perfectly stable. And mathematically, the only way for an orbit like that to maintain stability at that distance from Earth's gravity, without decaying or spinning off, is if the object is under constant infinitesimal propulsion." She stopped, looking out the dome window at the vast, desolate landscape. "It's not debris. It's not natural. It's not a ship either too small, too faint. It's a marker, a beacon, something placed there, deliberately, following rules we haven't learned yet." Hernan just looked between us, shaking his head slowly. "I don't care about the orbit," he mumbled. "I care about going home." That's when Elena, in a flash of pure, reckless brilliance, made her decision. She slid the physical disk into the sleeve of my heavy parka. "Alex, you're the technical support. You ride down with Hernan. You take this disk. Get off the mountain, get out of Chile, and get this sequence to a small, private journal I trust. One that will publish it without political interference." "What about you?" I asked. "I stay," she said, forcing a brave smile. "I tell the brass the surge corrupted the primary drive. I give them the sensor crosstalk story. I buy you 24 hours to disappear." The truck arrived. It was a chaotic scene of hurried packing, clipped communication, and oxygen tanks being swapped out. Hernan, relieved to be leaving the death zone, never looked back that I was riding in the back, squeezed beside the emergency gear, the disc pressing against my ribs like a cold, heavy secret. As we began the long, winding descent, dropping beneath the cloud line, I looked up for the last time. The mountain dome, gleaming white in the morning sun, looked like a watchful eye, and I suddenly felt profoundly alone, carrying the secret of the universe's quietest resident. I spent the next week lying low, paranoid about every shadow. I finally made it to a bustling city in Argentina, found a secure connection, and sent the encrypted data, the whole impossible sequence, to the specific academic contact Elena had given me. And here's the happy ending, the true release. 3 months later, I was back in the States, back to traffic and deadlines, trying to act normal. Then, an anonymous package arrived. A thin, brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a small, heavy piece of metal, a highly polished shard of silver, almost certainly from the array we'd been working on. Attached was a clipping from a tiny, peer-reviewed European journal. The headline was small, unassuming: "Analysis of Coordinated Low-Frequency Anomaly, 48:17 cycle. Indicates potential for non-Keplerian orbital dynamics." It was published. The knowledge was out. The anomaly was not dismissed as static. It wasn't classified as military. It was entered into the worldwide catalog of things scientists need to spend the next century figuring out. The organization couldn't bury it because it was already part of the collective scientific unconscious. That I never heard from Elena Rostova again, but I knew she was safe, probably back in her remote, freezing control room, drinking black coffee and setting up new dishes. Because now, she wasn't the only one listening. She had forced the world to listen with her. I look at that little shard of metal sometimes. It's a beautiful, pointless keepsake. And while the truth about what the Whistler is, a surveillance satellite, a navigational beacon, an orbital marker from a civilization that just needed a quiet corner of space, is still unknown, I don't care. The happy ending wasn't finding an alien. The happy ending was not having to carry the impossible secret alone anymore. I handed the weight of the universe off to the thousands of scientists whose job it is to worry about 48 hours and 17 minutes. And that, my friends, is the definition of bliss. I smile, leaning back, the tension finally gone. I'm definitely sticking to cycling tours that involve paved roads and motels from now on.